Hi everyone, Flaming Footy here and welcome back to another YouTube video on the channel. And today guys, here we are to do another one of our AFL 2022 season reviews. Now in today's episode we are going to be doing the 17th place West Coast Eagles. So of course last episode we did the 18th place North Melbourne. It's going in ladder position, so we're going to be doing West Coast in today's episode. And we're going to be reviewing their season. And again, they didn't have the greatest of seasons either, finishing 17th, but we're going to go over that more very soon. But of course, first of all, what's to come in this episode. So again, nothing changes. Recap the season in the ladder position. Highlights, best win, good players. Lowlights, worst loss. What's next? Trade period, coach, recap, and final words. So just going to go ahead, hop right into things. And of course, this is for the West Coast Eagles. So again, we're just about to review West Coast season, but first we're going to go check out the ladder. So, of course, West Coast, just like North Melbourne, finished with a record of 22 wins and 20 losses in another disappointing season for them. 8 points as well, but the only thing separating them and North Melbourne is, of course, the plus 4% they had. North Melbourne had 55.8 and West Coast had 59.8, but it was still a very disappointing season to be dangling down there from a 9th finish last year to a 17th finish this year, but it did end up starting at the end of last year where they just weren't playing great games of footy. But anyway, let's hop into the review. So, West Coast downfall did really begin late last season where they started to play really bad footy, and it had almost carried over into this season. But for the first few rounds, they did have a really COVID-decimated side, but when it came to the later rounds, that's not an excuse anymore. You can't have COVID for 23 rounds of the year, or 23 weeks of the year. That's not possible. Well, I mean, it is possible in absolute extreme scenarios, but they didn't. But round one, very interesting game, but a very disappointing loss to Gold Coast, a game that I thought they were most certainly going to win. It was at Perth. Gold Coast haven't won there forever, and yeah, it was a very disappointing game from a West Coast point of view, and it was a pretty decent 27-point loss. Round two, they had half a waffle side, and they managed to lose by 15. It's almost a win out of a loss for the West Coast Eagles. Round three, a derby, they were disappointed. They lost to the Dockers by 55 points in the end. Round four, this was their best win of the season for sure. Or one of their best wins of the season for sure. It was a really good win over Collingwood at Marvel. Collingwood, they ended up getting through to a prelim to lose by 1 point, and this side managed to beat them. That was insane. And it was a moment that West Coast were really happy for. They were really happy that they managed to go ahead and win that game. And it was away from home. They've had troubles, and they managed to do it. And then Sydney comfortably came to Optus Stadium to smash the Eagles. Sydney didn't actually beat the Eagles by as much as they could have, but they still did give them an absolute thumping. And then the next week they travelled to Adelaide and lose to a power side that started the season 0-5 to give them their first win in, well, really easy fashion. And then it was the monstrous loss to the West Coast. This was their worst loss of the season at home on a Friday night footy game broadcasted to pretty much the whole of Australia, and they got thumped by 109 points. Richmond fans would have loved it. West Coast fans would have been disappointed. It was their only real taste of prime time Friday night footy for the season, and yeah, they dished up a performance like that. Very disappointing for their supporters, their fans, and Footy WA as well. And then they lost to the Lions by 75 at the Gabba. It's always tough to go and beat the Lions there, though. Then they got thumped by the D's, and then they got thumped by the Giants as well. They got thumped by the Dogs at Perth. They actually were very lucky to lose by 31 points to the Crows. The Crows absolutely had them locked away, but an even contest in quarters 2, 3, and 4 managed to make them lose by that. And then this was a really good loss. Really good loss for them. It was an 18-point loss to eventual premiers, the Cats, at Optus Stadium, and that brought a bit of life. It was like last week against the Crows wasn't too bad. This week against the Cats was a really good fight, and then the next week they prevail and they get a win against the Bombers, which they were very happy with, a 10-point win. They would love that. And then they didn't do too bad against the against the Tigers. They did lose late at the MCG, but they again hung in there for most of that contest, and then it started to go downfall. They were so close with Carlton at some stages. They almost came back to just about even stages, and then Carlton blow them away in the end to win by 63, the Blues. And then they actually put up a couple of more decent performances against the Hawks and the Saints, losing by 25 and 28. They actually played okay in both of those games. And then they played really well against the Gold Coast Suns at Metcon. Another really good performance by the Eagles. Again, though, just the saying too little too late. Just couldn't win them the game in that one. And then against the Crows, Josh Kennedy's farewell game, he gets 8 goals, but they cannot win. That's a disappointing loss because they had a really good chance to beat the Crows in Perth, but couldn't prevail. Lost to the Dockers by 24 in a wet Saturday night derby. And then, yeah, the sad part, they finished off their season with an 85-point loss to eventual premiers, the Cats, at Cardinia Park, but they hate Cardinia Park. Best win of the season, easy, really easy. It was a really easy one there. It was definitely against Collingwood. If you compare where Collingwood and Essendon ended up finishing, this was a really good win for them and their footy club. Collingwood don't like Marvel, and they took the advantage. They don't like Marvel either. They took it, and yeah, they take the win by 13 points, and they had some really disastrous losses. 84 to Port Adelaide, 109 to Richmond, 75 to Brisbane, 74 to Melbourne. Some of the examples, 101 to the Dogs. They just got thumped in pretty much half of their games this year. They were quite a disappointing side. In the end, were West Coast. Now, though, trade period-wise, what would be good for them? Well, they could have the addition of Luke Jackson. Unlikely. His home looks to be Fremantle, but he has just requested a trade to a Perth team. He hasn't mentioned which team. Fremantle are more likely to get him, but if West Coast go bold and trade pick 2, they will end up getting him in the door, but they do need to use a first-round pick. The last time they used one was Andrew Gaff, and he is getting on now. There's a stack of their players which are really getting on. They're not really doing anything trade-wise. Willie Rioli is going to be lost to a club. It is more likely to be Port Adelaide, but if Port Adelaide do not cough up what West Coast want, which at this stage is Mitch Georgiades, then that deal will not go through and they'll trade him elsewhere. To be completely honest, I think he's worth a second or a third rounder at absolute most. I think teams will probably give him a late second rounder, early third rounder, and I'm not sure if West Coast are going to be willing for that. To be completely honest, he hasn't had some really influential performances that I've seen this year. And of course, that drug scandal has also made his value gone downhill too. As to the coach, I don't really know what they're going to do with their coach. But yeah, they need to use a top 10 pick, or they do have the choice, as I said, in North Melbourne to split that pick. And split that pick, trade pick number 2 out, and maybe get 8 and 15. Like those are just example picks, but 2 first rounders, or that first of the second round, which means you've got 24 hours to make a decision if they're doing 2 draft nights, all that. So there is options aplenty for West Coast, but if they want to use that pick 2, there's going to be some really good players in the draft. Will Ashcroft would be off the board by then, and Brisbane should match a bid for him anyway. So for West Coast, they'll probably just take the best player available in the pool, but they do need a bit of fresh blood around there because they haven't attacked the draft for a long time, and they don't really seem to do too much from trade periods. See if they can get Luke Jackson, that's a massive, massive, massive plus. You feel like Fremantle will get him, though, because of their exodus that they're having. And if they can split that top 10 pick into 2 really good picks, that could be a bonus as well. And yeah, they'll be asking high for Willie Rioli, and if they do end up getting Mitch Georgiades, that'd be a massive help. Bit of fresh blood, or even if they can get a late second rounder for him, I think they'd have to be pretty happy with that as well, because they'll be having a bit of a strong draft hand going into this season. But I think that's going to wrap us up for this West Coast Eagles AFL 2022 season review. The recap and the final words was, again, another really poor season from a team that we know that can do better than this. But again, who knows how long this could last, their spell at the bottom of the ladder. But yeah, they do need to play hardball for Willie Rioli. If that's what's gonna work for them. And yeah, they've got to try and use that top 10 pick wisely, whether it be A for Jackson, B for the best player in the pool at the time, or C to split it into 2. We're just gonna have to wait and see. They are gonna be an interesting team about that pick 2. They don't want to trade it, but stranger things have happened before. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. See you guys, and then miss another video on the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye everyone. Flaming Footy out.